Thank you for coming. So thank you for Solseed for having us. Thank you, Ruben, and thank you for everyone here. This is super awesome. This is my first presentation to a live audience in a while. So I gave a presentation to the neurofeedback community on plant medicines, and now it's kind of bringing the technology here. So this is the first time doing this in front of a live audience. So this will be on brain mapping, the new discoveries and effects of plant medicines, and what we're discovering with plant medicines. I like to start with a quote. So, the divorce between scientific facts and religious facts may not necessarily be eternal, as it first seems. The rigorously impersonal view of science might be one day appear as having been a useful eccentricity rather than the definitively triumphant position which the sectarian scientist at present so confidently announces it will be. So what I'm put this quote here is that so much of modern science, we try to separate the spirit, the soul from the scientific method. But the scientific method is mere observation. So these things can be part in one, and this is what we're doing today. We're seeing the science of the soul come forward. And this is where science will approach, this is where science will go in the 21st century. So this is me. I'm a Marine Corps National Guard veteran. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2011 with an airborne infantry company. I experienced ayahuasca the first time in 2014 after my deployment. I was really lost, and I experienced ayahuasca after that. I've been involved in the ayahuasca space one way or another since, so pretty much almost 10 years now. And I currently do QEEG brain mapping with plant medicines. So this is an overview of what we'll do. I kind of go into my story, just who I am, where I came from, why I got into this, because that's always important. We all have our stories and how we arrived at the position we are. Then I want to go into history of my field. So a lot of people don't know about, I call it spiritual neuroscience, we call it neurofeedback, neurotherapy. But where did this field come from and why is it important? Because the field I come from adds a unique view to what we're doing with plant medicines and insight we can gain from that. The importance of brain mapping. So I'll go into why brain mapping is important, what it can do, what the tools it can give us to understand plant medicines better, and how QEEG brain mapping and plant medicines can merge. So this is where we're going today. So my story pretty much starts in this space is that my personal life and was all converging, the kind of crisis after crisis, and then I went to Afghanistan. So I was in the officer track with the Marine Corps, and I was gonna go commission as a Marine Corps officer. This is me in I don't know, I was 25 or something here. So I was commissioned as the Marine Corps, and this is my whole welcome. So my whole objective was to commission the Marine Corps and to be more Marine Corps infantry officer, and this is my goal. And this neighbor cop beat me up, and it was this horrible story, this whole story in itself. But he was a neighbor, he was a cop, but off duty in uniform. He beat me up and charged me with all these assault on a police officer, all these things that never happened. So my life went in crisis at this moment because I was kicked out of the officer program. And then an old recruiter goes, hey, this airborne infantry unit's going to Afghanistan. Join this unit, get this deployment under your belt. It's a LURS unit, so basically it's like a recon unit, but at the battalion level. So deploy with this unit, get this under your belt, come back and get your commission. So I did what he said, I joined this unit, and my experience in Afghanistan, I enjoyed it a lot in many ways. I was going outside the wire every day, I trained their military, I was training a major, and so I got to experience the country a lot. But in other situations, my life was put on the line for just ridiculous reasons, basically incompetence. And this happened over and over again. And each one of those, it's its own story. But eventually I decided that, there's other things that happened too. So as I was there, I saw the mission wasn't what they said it would be. So we were the only infantry battalion in Kabul, which is the most westernized city, and every day would give reports that we can't train the military, they're not advancing. And this was years ago. And then the generals go in front of Congress and say that we're making great progress, the training is going great. And I knew everyone in the area, and this was the most westernized city, so I knew the provinces had to be much worse than where I was at. So it was kind of these lies, disenchantment with the mission, and then my life being put on the line, and kind of just personal trauma in my life all built up in one area. So then I decided that the military was not my path anymore. But as people know in the military, this becomes so much for your identity. Like, what is my path now? So as a last-ditch effort, I went and tried ayahuasca in Peru, like so many people. So tried 2014. I think most people have experienced plant medicines here, so don't have to go into full stories of what that can be, but it was a very life-changing experience. I saw auras, I saw the shaman healing people across the room, I saw my own energy being released from this trauma I've held up for years and years and years. And it made me realize that there is a spiritual realm, that we're not just what we're trained to think, right? Just, mammals with a body with chemical reactions. We have a soul, we have an energy body. And my whole life started changing. And it's interesting when these events happen, you realize things are going to change, but you might not realize exactly where it's going to go or what's going to happen or what the next step's going to be. So that was my first experience in ayahuasca in 2014. So yeah, it's almost 10 years ago now. And I started coming back and forth to Peru after that. So for me, ayahuasca was very powerful, but I noticed the effects started fading over time. And each person can be different. Some people might be a lifetime, but probably depends on your level of trauma. So I'd feel great for like 3 months. I'd be just, I feel right on. But then I noticed the effects started fading. And I had a friend in Omaha, Nebraska, which was pretty rare at the time and still rare now. She was doing QEEG brain mapping, and she took my brain map and she saw a pattern for PTSD, anxiety, and insomnia. That's what she called it. So, being from the Marines, I wasn't going to talk to like a talk therapist or anything. But I'll take a brain map. Here's your brain waves. Here's where you're dysregulated. And the idea is you can train them in a healthy way. So this was really amazing for me. Like, okay, this is really interesting. So I've always been a big reader. I started buying all the books. And when I bought all these books, I started realizing that there's many spiritual implications to this technology. That this isn't just for healing anxiety and trauma, but we can raise ourselves to higher states, and we can actually do many of the things that yogis do and stuff like this. That once you identify a brainwave that person needs for healing, you can identify that and train that. But you can also train a brainwave for meditation, for deep states, hypnagogic states, and for these places that are really truly healing for the individual. And the things that we're doing with plant medicines, now we're starting to learn how to do with technology. We're starting to be able to guide people into these states. And we all live down here now, but I was in 2014, I can't do ayahuasca all the time. So this is where I could put this technology in as a daily practice and start doing this regular basis to help heal myself. So I'm gonna go into the history of EEG technology. So I'm gonna go into the history of the field because I want to bring the field to you so you understand where this comes from, because I think this has huge significance on why this technology is so applicable to plant medicines and why it can be so powerful. Because generally speaking, when people do brain maps, MRIs, EEGs, they're really looking at it a medical way. They're not looking at it the same way we are. I'll go in detail on this. So, and just the history of the field is fascinating. So the first brainwave was discovered by Hans Berger, who's a German scientist, in July 6, 1924. I think, eventually as this technology becomes more well known, there might be a Hans Berger Day, because this is a really significant event in human history where we can actually read brainwaves, that we know that we're electrical beings, there's electrical field come off the brain. The first brainwave discovered was alpha. So that's alpha, the first, and he discovered it. But the interesting thing is that Hans Berger was almost killed in a military accident in 1893, much earlier in his life. And that night he received a telegram from his sister, and that asking if he was okay. So he was in awe by this because somehow she knew miles and miles away that his life was in danger. And so he made a mission of his life to search what was the mechanism for this. And in the process, he was able to find the first brainwaves. And it's interesting because mainstream publications will say, oh, this is ridiculous, he's looking for telepathy. But in the process, he found brainwaves. Now, I personally think the evidence exists for telepathy, but he did discover brainwaves, looking for the mechanism why this happened. So we discovered human beings have brainwaves, and then in the 1960s, a man named Barry Sturman, one of the greats in the field, he hooked up cats to see if they could train a brainwave called SMR. It's a brainwave between 12 and 15 hertz. It's right in the motor strip, and he just wanted to see if he could do it. And he rewarded the cats with milk and chicken broth because milk wasn't enough. But the cats actually learned how to train a brainwave. So the first time in history, we learned that brainwaves could be trained, could be enhanced. So this was considered impossible before this. And so many different things that we considered impossible before the 1960s and 70s, we started being able to do. Training pulse rate, training ham temperature, training all kinds of different things, including brainwaves, that we could train them and make them more, well, right now we figured we can train them. So then NASA approached Barry Sturman. They wanted to know the lethal dose of rocket fuel, because rocket fuel could be released in the cabin or when people are fueling rockets. And this rocket fuel would cause seizures and death. So they want to know the lethal dose. So they don't usually I don't think they can do experiments like this now, but back then they put a bunch of cats in a room, put that rocket fuel in, and half the cats had seizures and died. The other half of the cats didn't have seizures and didn't die. And they were confused by this, why this happened. Well, they found out those cats that didn't die were all in the previous experiment training these SMR brainwaves. So whatever this brainwave did made their biology more resilient to seizures and death. So some of the first experiments, then we started training people with epilepsy and things like this to start treating them. But this is where, like this brainwave, we realized that this could increase resiliency, make people resistant to seizures. And so in this one instance, we discovered not only could we train brainwaves, but by training brainwaves, they can make people more resilient. So around the same time in the 60s, we started training spiritual brainwaves. Just the very beginning, Joe Kamiya started training what we call the alpha wave. And this wave is associated with spiritual states. We see this wave in meditators. And just like all these serendipitous events that have happened throughout this field, whether it was the psychic event that caused someone to look into brainwaves in the first place, and then happened these cats were in the room, he had this person that could get alpha brainwaves all the time. He was able to train really efficiently. So he had this person, like 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 10,000, was able to train really efficiently his alpha waves. And so he learned that we could train these waves, and they started working with people that could train these alpha waves. So one of the other greats in the field, the person I really admire, his name's Elmer Green. And his idea is that neurofeedback and biofeedback will be the yoga of the West, and that we don't have the same kind of culture, self-discipline, maybe mental ideas to sit for years and meditate. But with this technology, we could show exactly where the brain needs to go. So we can show these spiritual states. It's like holding a mirror in front of the brain and guiding it to these states. So Elmer Green, he invented the alpha theta protocol, which is very famous in my field for the people who use it. So this protocol, it's not exactly meditation. It takes people down into a state of hypnagogia between sleep and awake. So right before you go to sleep, or when you wake up, when you're not really present, but kind of images pop up, that's the state we're training. So my mentor calls it, or his analogy is that most people think there's just awake and asleep, but it's actually a 100-story building with all these states in between. And once we can learn how to train these, we can access these. So this state, this alpha theta state, this hypnagogic state, this is where trauma is stored. So we can access trauma and release trauma, but it's also this place of the unconscious. So people can have these powerful archetypal symbolism come up. You can have like the wise old man, and these things can, for me, it's different each person. For me, I feel like emotional release when I go in these states. So we don't really problem solve with our conscious mind. Everything happens in the unconscious. So when we learn how to access the subconscious, we can solve different problems. So, or whatever it is. It could be personal problems, but also this is a state where they studied inventors, where people would have like these visions of different kinds of like whatever they're studying. They were trying to find a solution to this problem, and it would spontaneously pop into their mind. But it wouldn't pop into their mind in their day-to-day conscious state. It would pop into their mind in certain kinds of states. So they study these states and try to recreate them. And this is where the alpha theta state came from. But it's also associated with spirituality. This state is also a state of the soul, the spirit, and there really is no time in this state. So I want to talk about alpha theta protocol a little more, just because I think it's so important. It's the subconscious. It's a place where you explore your own subconscious. For me, it's very much Jungian, that idea of the individuation where you connect the conscious mind to the subconscious mind. And as you start to access that more, you start becoming more you, and it empowers you to be the best you. Because when that's aligned, when that's communicating, you're in the process of individuation. And the last thing I would say about these spiritual states we train, so plant medicines can allow us access, but generally speaking, spiritual traits, it's a neural pathway. So we have to train these neural pathways. So we can access it in certain ways through plant medicines, but really we have to train these neural pathways to make them stronger so we can access these on a regular basis. And this is what we do with neurofeedback in the brain training. All right, now coming back to the brain maps, which we're all here for. So this whole field led to what we have today is this powerful tool called QEEG brain mapping. And this started in my field in the 90s. I think it was actually invented by New York University in the late 80s. And basically we can see now where people are dysregulated, so we can target those areas of the brain. But this is the important part, and this is part I want to emphasize today, is that the style of brain mapping that we do measures affect, is what we call it, or in psychology, but emotional states, feeling. Where mainstream neurology, they look at brain waves going across a screen, and they might look for abnormalities that might be a brain tumor, might be epilepsy, might be a head trauma. But we're looking for emotion as well, and this is coming out of a clinical field where people have worked for decades with people. So we know that certain brain patterns might be like a busy mind or anxiety or ADD. And these things, generally speaking, are just now being acknowledged by mainstream neuroscience, but still a small subsection. So we're kind of in this little corner over here. We have this really special technology and a really special way of looking at brain maps. And this is the tool that is allowing us to see different things with plant medicines that hasn't been seen before. I forgot to put the picture on the slide, but my mentor, Dr. Suter, I met him in 2019 at ISNR conference. It's the international conference for neurofeedback training. And I basically was just a guy with an idea. I walked around, started meeting people, like, hey, I want to combine plant medicines and brain mapping, neurofeedback. And he goes, I've been waiting to meet someone like you. I'll train you. And I looked him up, and it turns out he's one of the top people in the field. He's written all kinds of books. He has over 500 clinics that use this technology. And I asked myself, is this really going to happen? But sure enough, every other week we did a Zoom call, and we went over shamanism and brainwaves. So he's also he's very familiar with shamanism. In my opinion, he's a shaman himself. He doesn't call himself that. He's a master in Zen. He's really familiar with neurology. So you're bringing all these fields together. And it was really interesting because it goes, Luke, you know, most people aren't like you. Most people are in a clinic working with people, but you're like a field researcher and you can find out stuff that we don't know yet. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So when I first started, I started with family and friends. I started brain mapping people I knew, and I started training them. And one person was my grandma. She had Alzheimer's at the time, and at the time she couldn't remember the day of the week, and she couldn't cook a meal. After the training, she could do those things. She was not what she was, but enough where, you know, when people have Alzheimer's, that confusion creates anxiety. You know, it creates stress to their system. It also creates stress to the family. So to heal her to the bail where she was better, took stress out the family, took stress out herself, and it was really powerful for me. Like, okay, this stuff is working, you know. And then I came to Peru right after the lockdowns ended. The first flight I could get, I came down, and yeah, I started brain mapping friends and other people, and then I started partnering with retreats. And with retreats, we do pre-maps and post-maps. So it depends on the kind of retreat. We kind of offer as an option. Some retreats want to include it with everybody. And we do a pre-map and a post-map. And I'll go into this more, but this hasn't been done yet. So people have done brain mapping. And if anyone finds anything differently, let me know. But I've gone through the research and I just went through a study in 2022 of all brain imaging that's ever been done with plant medicines. And all brain imaging has been done during the experience of plant medicines. No one has tracked it over time. So this is the first studies to start tracking it over time, which I think is very, very valuable because now we can see change. So I published 2 studies in the last 2 years. Actually, I think both studies have been published last year, but it took me a year to publish my first one. The last one took 6 months, and I'm hoping the next one can go faster. You know, I'm learning how to do it better. So we did, the ayahuasca study was my first study. We did pre-post maps with everyone involved. There's 4 participants, and it was the first study to track change over time, like I said. So we can track change, and this mapping system that we have allows us to see change in affect, change in state. We can see changes in motion. We can see that in many things. So we'll go into that, but like we're seeing things that haven't been really seen yet. And the second study I published was the first study on Wachuma to be published. So no one's brain imaged it yet. There's been barely even any questionnaire studies. You know, it's surprisingly how little research on some of these things have been done. So ayahuasca, MDMA, mushrooms have gotten a decent amount of attention. There's still a lot of research to be done there, but other things have almost nothing, and Wachuma's one of them. So with the Wachuma study, we had 10 people total, and we did 30 maps, pre, during, and post. And yeah, we got a lot of interesting data, and we'll go over the results. So what are we discovering? I think the biggest thing, the most interesting thing, is that we're seeing each brain move in a way that's needed, in a way that's healthy for itself. And we'll go into the brain mapping here, but so for example, so the mapping system my mentor designed looks at trauma a different way and the philosophy around its whole system. So basically how we understand it is the psychological model before the prescription drug model. So the prescription drug model, how it understands psychological disorder really fits prescription drugs. But before that, people experience a trauma, the body feels anxiety after the trauma, it like stores it in the body, and then the body starts moving to depression as a subconscious avoidance mechanism to like not feel that anymore. So in the healing process, as you take someone out of depression, they'll start feeling more anxious before they heal. That's a normal part of the healing process. And all these other things that people deal with all are within that paradigm of trauma. So the brain also stores trauma in different ways. It compartmentalizes trauma. And from what I understand, my mentor's mapping system and how we look at things is unique. So gives us a powerful tool because the brain has different ways to compartmentalize trauma and ways to avoid it. So in the brain map, we can see this person has a busy mind. This person might daydream. This person might dissociate. All these different things are ways the mind, the body is compartmentalizing that trauma to stop feeling it. So what I think we're seeing here is a new way. Well, this model is starting to become validated by the plant medicines because we're seeing the same thing play out with plant medicines. In addition to emotional trauma, we're also seeing physical trauma. So people that come in with head trauma, we're seeing that actually like really being changed with plant medicines. So like I was just talking about, the brain compartmentalizes trauma. Trauma is experienced, is stored in the body. So when the brain compartmentalizes trauma, it's a defense mechanism, but over time, it creates stress and wear and tear in the brain. So it's very important to heal the trauma because that compartmentalization will actually affect memory. The memory, because memory takes all different parts of the brain. So it's important to heal that trauma. And that's what we're doing with plant medicines, and that's what I'm doing with neurotherapy. All right, to the brain mapping. So I don't think I've done any brain maps anyone in the room except for Luis. So a brain map, when I go over brain maps, a brain map alone takes like an hour to go through with everybody, with a person. But so we'll skim the surface and seek the major findings and how these findings fit into this theme. So this is a 26-year-old male and pre and post 3 ayahuasca ceremonies. So, okay, this is a brain map. With delta, theta, alpha, and beta, and how your brain waves appear in each one of these categories, this tells us a lot about what's going on. Each color represents one standard deviation. So red represents 1 above normal, yellow 2 above normal, light blue 1 below normal or average, 2 dark blue 2 below average. So we can see here, this person has a high frontal theta pattern in the front, along the midline, along the temporal lobes, and a little in the back. This person also has a high alpha pattern in the back and a high beta pattern. So the high theta pattern is a classic ADD pattern. The classic pattern this person can't focus.
High theta?
High theta. The alpha pattern, we call this perseverance in the field. This is a mind that can't shut down. So there's another way to avoid trauma, to keep thinking, you don't feel. So this is perseverance, busy mind. That's a pattern for lack of focus. And this is a classic anxiety pattern, maybe like rumination. So what we see is, as that theta pattern completely disappears, the alpha pattern is greatly reduced, and that beta pattern goes away. So we still have the delta pattern. That might be from a head trauma. That didn't change that much, but these 3 patterns did. And that's very significant. So what makes this mapping system interesting is we can track these kind of things. Most mapping systems do not do this. Yeah.
Do you measure all these states in a moment, or do you have to go through the states and get separate measurements for each?
No, this is all in the moment. So how the software, so when we take a brain map, put a cap on, there's 19 locations. It's measuring all 19 at once. And as it's measuring it, the software, it's like a prism. So you have one brainwave at each location or one reading, but that software opens it and you can see all these different patterns within it. So that within that one wave, there's all these different waves and it separates it. So we see delta, theta, alpha, and beta. So a brain map, generally speaking, takes 10 minutes. We do eyes closed and eyes open. So each time, because we can see differences. And I should do a whole presentation on brain mapping, how it works. But yeah, so does that answer your question? Okay. So we're seeing these patterns dramatically reduce. And also what we do is we do questionnaire studies along with the brain mapping. So we do questionnaires along with the brain mapping because these questionnaires are designed around neural structures and neurophysiology. So these questionnaires and brain mapping validate each other. So the questionnaire, this person was out of norm for attention, couldn't focus. And after 3 days of ayahuasca, you can focus. And all these other measurements change as well. So,
Depression go.
yeah.
So these are what they self-reported, or those are
These are
related to the
self-reported.
brain? Okay.
So these self-reported questionnaires. These questionnaires are designed along like neurophysiology, so we can confirm things we're seeing. So if we see, so for example, if I needed to, if I didn't have a brain map on someone and I saw these things out of norm, I could maybe get, infer what parts of their brains out of norm, But, so the interesting thing is, we expected anxiety and depression to be helped out with plant medicines. I've never heard of it being able to help with focus. And for that matter, memory. So it'd be really interesting, I haven't done this yet, to do like cognitive performance tests with people. Because the emotional brain is a deep core structure that everything else is built upon. So you start healing that, their cognitive abilities would probably increase and become more efficient because that core structure is healed. So, and I think this is what we're seeing here. This is being validated through this. Any questions so far? I'm going through a lot, so if you guys want to have a question or, have anything, yeah.
I'm just curious, like, if that's relative to, like, whatever kind of ayahuasca ceremony, if there's, like, a specific, like, if you're working with, like, a curandera, or if that's based on just the structure of the plant medicine itself? Or...
No, and that's a really good question. So most studies, they're done in a clinical setting, and they're done with, like, the active alkaloid, and maybe like a double-blind experiment. But there's lots of problems with that. So this is all more, what's the term? This is kind of like experimental research or I forgot, I'm drawing a blank now on the term for it. But basically, we're not so interested in controls, we're interested in the wholeness of the experience. So I want to capture the whole experience of everything that's happening. So this could be the shaman, this could be the plant, this could be all kinds of different factors. Because I think if we capture the wholeness of experience, we might not control the data quite as well, but we're understanding healing in a different way. And I think traditional healing is important to capture the wholeness of experience. So we might not know exactly where this is, but over time, it gives us insights on what to study more and things like that. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Anything else? All right, so this is a 41-year-old female, pre and post 3 ayahuasca ceremonies. So this is a little different way of viewing it. This is a location map. But this low alpha there is associated with PTSD, with trauma. And you saw the dramatic increase right here. That's pretty neat over a short period of time. This is over 3 days. And each one of these brain maps, how we measure change, is very, very high. So these people have change in the brain that implies there's a lot of neuroplasticity going on. So we're seeing a large amount of change in a short period of time, which doesn't usually happen unless there's like a head trauma in a negative way or neurofeedback. But neurofeedback usually takes months, and we're seeing this within like a week. So this is the same person, and the last person, she had the high delta pattern. I didn't show it. But here, this is the connections between networks. How this mapping software measures network connection is the networks, most networks go across the brain, the temporal lobes. So most networks, major networks, go between the 2 hemispheres, not front to back, but back side to side. So when it's red, that means they're hyper-connected, overworking. When it's blue, that means there's hypo-connection, that's underworking. When it's blue, that means the networks are degrading. So this is likely from a possible head trauma. But at delta, especially, it's all blue. We see dramatic change there from almost all the sites to this one being blue in delta. And that's a crazy change in a short period of time. Like, this is not usual. And then we're seeing also change in different areas as well. It's also important to note the brain isn't a linear organ. So when people think of healing, they think of like, okay, from here to here, but the brain's constantly reiterating itself, and it knows the best strategies to heal itself. So it might, for example, you might go out of norm to heal into a normal direction later on. It finds different ways to heal itself. So change itself, if change is happening, it's finding ways to reiterate itself and heal itself that we might not understand yet, but that's what's going on. So this is a 52-year-old male after ayahuasca dieta. I showed my mentor this, and he's never seen a pattern like this. So we do get interesting people in Peru. And so this, especially this alpha pattern, where it's very high all along the outside and very low along the midline. So, and I know what to make of this. And this beta pattern is very low beta.
And that's before and after?
This is the top is before and the bottom is after. So what we're seeing here is after a month of ayahuasca, his power levels increase. Instead of being a dark blue, it's mostly light blue now. And what we're seeing here, which I finally understood, we're seeing patterns within patterns. So as you heal a brain, a new pattern might present itself. So as you heal one pattern, you have another pattern to heal. So this pattern's being healed. You see this low power pattern healing, and this pattern's actually becoming a little worse, but it's actually a natural place of healing. So for me, this is giving me insight as well, like, okay, this person had a powerful ayahuasca experience, he's feeling really good, but I know this pattern might come back to affect him a few months down the road. So this is a perfect person where neurofeedback could be really powerful for him, because the plant medicines open up that neuroplasticity, and now that gives us leverage to work with whatever he's dealing with. So I would ideally, I'm actually still talking to this person, this is months ago, but he wants to train now. But ideally I want to train this person right away where the brain's fresh, the neuroplasticity is fresh, and then you can allow access to like train that pattern away and keep those spiritual states going longer. So that spiritual feeling, we want to keep that going. We want to keep that happening. So, yeah, this is this interesting person, interesting brain map. That's kind of my insights on that. So this is a 29-year-old female with head trauma, pre and post. She actually came to our retreat. We've started running retreats now where we do brain mapping. We've run 2 so far. She was an MMA fighter. So she came in, she was knocked out a month before our retreat. And the high delta there is the head trauma. You see afterwards the head trauma is pretty much gone. And
She was working with ayahuasca already?
yeah, she was working with ayahuasca. We did, so like again, it's hard to tell exactly, but we did 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, 1 wachuma ceremony, and hikes and stuff like that. But all that together went from a high delta pattern. Delta represents brain inflammation.
And that's on how long, how much time?
9 days.
9 days.
Our retreat's 9 days.
So the first one was day 1 and